An act of courage happens when, despite an individual being afraid, he or she takes an action for the sake of someone else that carries the probability of personal risk or harm, or failure. An act of courage is never done for personal gain and must not be taking the easy way out. Acts of courage are most often associated with childhood heroes such as superheroes, soldiers, firefighters, and revolutionaries. But they can also come from people who you might not think of quite as much. Single parents, teachers, and even children can perform an act of courage. For an act to be considered truly courageous, it must measure up to these following 6 criteria. Firstly, an act of courage must carry some sort of risk to self. For example, if a man were unable to be burned by fire, it would not be courageous for him to walk into a fire to save a child, because there was no personal risk involved for him. But if in real life a man were to walk into a fire to save a child, it would be courageous because there was great personal risk to him, as he's not impervious to fire. In addition, an act of courage must be done despite being afraid. A good example of this is in a situation where a man does not care whether he lives or dies. It is not courageous for him to go and save a child at risk to himself because he does not have any fear of dying. He does not care whether he lives or dies, and so it is not brave. Alternatively, if he does care, it is very courageous as he does it despite great personal fear. The third criteria for an act of courage is that it must not be done for personal gain. This is because there are sometimes risks involved and the individual may certainly be afraid, but they are doing it to avoid a larger fear. For example, a woman who steals from a bank to pay for her own personal expenses is not courageous because she's just doing it to avoid a larger fear of having to come by the money honestly. Alternatively, if she does the same thing of stealing the money to pay for her dying father's surgery, then it is courageous because although it might be considered immoral, she has done it to give the money to someone she believes needs it much more at the moment. Another criteria is that an act of courage must not be the easy way out. For example, if a woman is in a burning building and has a chance at survival by jumping out the window, but instead chooses to sit and burn in the fire, she is not courageous because although it is quite scary to burn in a fire, she only stayed because she could not overcome her fear of jumping out of the building. Alternatively, had she jumped out of the window and possibly even died, she still would have been courageous because she wouldn't have been giving up. She would have been trying to save her life. The fifth act is that it must be done of your own convictions. If a man goes off to war because it's what his family expects, then it is not courageous. But if he goes off to war because he wants to serve his country, it is brave because it is done of his own convictions. The final criteria is that it must not be done to show off. If a man goes into the water to save a drowning person simply to show off to a lady that's standing close by, then he's not courageous because he does it for his own personal reasons. But should the man do the same thing because he cares whether the person lives or dies, then it is courageous, because even though might be a woman watching, he did it because he wanted to save the individual's life. In summary, for an act to be courageous, it must be done despite there being a considerable risk to self. It must be done despite being afraid, and it must also be done of your own convictions. It must never be done for personal gain or to show off, and must absolutely never be the easy way out. Elias Shakur, the main protagonist of the book Blood Brothers, carried out numerous acts of courage throughout his life and continues to do so now. Over the course of the book, Elias was constantly in situations that endangered his health and certainly posed risk, but he still persevered, and rather than just surviving, he thrived so that he could help his Palestinian people. There were many points in the book which Shakur noted that he wanted to live a simple, quiet life, helping out the people of the small villages, but felt a burning conviction inside him that he must do what he can to bring peace between Israeli and Palestinian. Shakur noted that he was very afraid, even at some points for his own life, and yet he still worked for peace between two people. Shakur's experiences in Ibilin show clearly that he never did anything for personal gain, as he slept hard on church benches in a rundown shacks just so they could reteach the love of Christ to the people there. Shakur also proved through the aforementioned desire to live quietly that he did nothing in the sake of showing off. Certainly Shakur had given into his desire to live a more quiet life in solitude in the small villages. But instead of doing that, instead of taking the easy way out, he stayed true to his convictions. That is why I believe Elias Shakur is a truly courageous man.